Our story begins in a crowded London cafe, where patrons gather around a broadcast in stunned silence upon learning that the world's youngest person has just been murdered. While everyone else grieves the loss, Theo Farron grabs his morning coffee and casually pushes his way outside, completely indifferent to the collective despair around him. Seconds later, a bomb rips through the very same cafe, showering the street in debris and thick smoke. His routine morning commute just became significantly worse. Following the blast, he heads into his office at the Ministry of Energy, where his coworkers are openly weeping over the global news. Theo steps into Mr. Griffith's office and immediately uses the widespread grief to secure permission to leave early for the day. On the train ride out of the city, rioters along the tracks pelt the reinforced carriage with burning debris and rocks. He arrives at a heavily militarized station, walking past rows of cages where armed guards keep desperate refugees locked up like animals. Outside the checkpoint, his old friend Jasper greets him with open arms and a warm smile. As the two drive away, another caged government transport rolls by, carrying more detained refugees deeper into the grim countryside. At Jasper's secluded home, Theo gently wraps a scarf around Janice, who remains motionless and catatonic in her wheelchair. Later on, he relaxes on the couch and flips through the instructions of a government-issued suicide kit. Because light reading in this world is hard to come by, Theo brushes off any talk of hope or the mysterious human project, insisting humanity was already ruined long before people stopped having babies. Back on the streets of London, he navigates another bleak morning as riot police round up more immigrants into metal pens. Suddenly, a group of masked assailants ambushes him in broad daylight, throwing a hood over his head and tossing him into the back of a van. His captors drag him into a hideout plastered with newspaper clippings and finally pull the sack off his head. To his utter disbelief, the leader of the group unmasks herself, revealing his estranged ex-wife Julian. Julian explains the political shift of her militant group, the Fishes, and firmly denies any role in the cafe bombing he survived. She cuts straight to the point, explaining that she desperately needs transit papers to safely move a young refugee to the coast. Knowing his family connections, she urges him to contact his well-placed cousin at the Ark of the Arts to acquire the travel permits. When she offers £5,000 for the favor, Theo angrily turns down the cash, clearly insulted by the transaction. With the meeting over, armed men grab him from behind and force the sack right back over his head. As she walks away, Julian casually remarks that the ringing in his ears is just ear cells dying, offering one last piece of cheerful trivia before departing. Shoved into the back of a moving van, he gets a stern warning from the militants to keep quiet about everything he saw. Luke slips a contact card into his pocket anyway, just in case £5,000 suddenly starts sounding more appealing. He is dumped unceremoniously back onto a wet London street, pulling off the hood to find himself alone. Nearby, a large crowd of demonstrators in yellow cloaks marches through the streets, proclaiming that global infertility is divine punishment. Theo decides to use his connections after all, riding through heavily fortified checkpoints into the wealthy government sector. He enters the Ark of the Arts facility, passing through heavy security into a pristine sanctuary far removed from the misery outside. Inside the Grand Gallery, he reunites with his cousin Nigel right in front of the towering statue of David. Over lunch, Nigel casually explains how he rescues famous masterpieces from across Europe while his son Alex sits quietly at the table. Theo makes his pitch, fabricating a story about wanting to help a woman visit her sick brother down in Brighton. He asks Nigel to pull some strings and secure the necessary transit papers for the journey to the coast. Nigel walks him toward the massive windows overlooking the city and agrees to arrange the travel permits. When asked why he bothers preserving art when humanity has no future, Nigel simply admits that he tries not to think about it. Theo meets Luke at a pub to deliver the news, explaining that the papers are joint transit permits, meaning he has to accompany the girl himself. Luke accepts the condition and agrees to double the payout, turning Theo's simple favor into a high-paying escort job. Soon after, he sprints through the rain and barely manages to catch a moving double-decker bus. Heading up to the top deck, he takes a seat beside Julian to finalize their travel plans. The conversation turns quiet, and personal as Julian brings up their late child, noting how much the boy shared his eyes. But the tender moment quickly sours into an argument over how each of them dealt with the devastating grief of losing their son. Frustrated, Julian grabs her coat and storms toward the bus exit, bluntly announcing that this is their stop. He follows her out into a dreary alleyway and presses her on why she chose him for this escort job. She admits that despite everything, he is still the one person she trusts, though she quickly brushes off any suggestion of rekindling their past romance. Down the alley, Luke meets them with a getaway car and briefs the pair on their driving route toward the first military checkpoint. Climbing into the back, Theo is introduced to Miriam and the young woman they are escorting, Key. After nodding off during the drive, he is woken up by Julian as Luke announces they are closing in on Canterbury. The tension eases for a brief moment as Julian playfully spits a ping-pong ball into Theo's mouth, proving old habits die hard. But the laughter vanishes when a flaming car suddenly rolls down a hillside and crashes onto the road ahead. An armed mob swarms out from the woods and begins smashing the windows, forcing Luke to slam the car into reverse. Two armed men on a motorcycle chase them down and open fire through the windshield, hitting Julian directly in the neck. Luke rams the car into the motorcycle, sending both gunmen crashing hard onto the pavement. Inside the speeding car, Theo and Miriam frantically apply pressure to Julian's neck in a desperate effort to stop the heavy bleeding. Despite their efforts, the injury proves fatal and she dies in his arms. To make matters worse, a passing police car spots them on the road, quickly turning around to give chase. When the officers pull them over, they draw their weapons and order everyone inside to raise their hands with identification ready. Without warning, Luke steps out of the driver's seat and shoots both officers dead on the spot. He shoves a stunned Theo back into the vehicle and speeds off into the secluded woods. Behind them, the two slain officers are left lying abandoned on the empty country road. Once they pull over in the trees, Miriam and Key lay Julian's body on the ground, placing an amulet on her forehead in quiet prayer. Overwhelmed by shock and grief, Theo walks away from the group and empties his flask to numb the pain. Theo breaks down against a tree, weeping uncontrollably as the reality of losing Julian hits him all at once. Hearing Luke shout his name in the distance, he pulls himself together and heads back toward the vehicle. Soon after, the group drives off the main road, taking a muddy trail into a secluded rural farm. Luke explains the property belongs to allies named Tomasz and Emily, where the Fishes plan to elect their next leader. Once they arrive, Emily greets them outside and quickly ushers Miriam and Key into the house. Theo asks for immediate transport back to London, but Luke shuts him down, claiming the roads are far too dangerous until morning. While the Fishes gather in the dining room for their leadership vote, Tomasz hands Theo some dry clothes to change into. But when Theo steps outside, Tomasz follows right behind, making it clear he is under direct orders to keep him guarded. Emily then interrupts to tell Theo that Key is asking to speak with him privately in the barn. Nearby in the house, the Fishes raise their glasses to toast Luke, officially making him their new leader. Theo is led into the dimly lit dairy barn, where Key is waiting quietly among the livestock. As they talk, she points out the automated milking machines, casually explaining how the machinery works on the herd. She explains that Julian told her about his late son Dylan and instructed her to trust Theo to get her onto a boat. To explain why, Key unbuttons her robe, revealing that she is heavily pregnant in a world where fertility vanished 18 years ago. A stunned Theo can barely process the sight before Luke and Miriam rush into the stall to cover Key up. Back inside the farmhouse, the television news reports that Julian was killed during an armed clash with the police. Luke warns the group that the authorities will soon identify everyone involved in the incident, including Theo. A fierce argument breaks out over whether to deliver Key to the Human Project or use the unborn child as political leverage for their cause. Theo insists they must go public and get Key into a proper hospital, but the suggestion gets zero traction. Instead, Luke convinces Key to stay hidden on the farm until she gives birth before attempting to reach the Human Project. Luke insists on moving Key frequently between safe houses, though Miriam immediately objects to dragging a pregnant woman across the country. Later that night, Theo looks out the upstairs window and spots an argument outside as a group rolls in with a wounded motorcyclist. Sensing trouble, he quietly slips into the hallway to investigate. Downstairs, he overhears Luke tearing into Patrick for leading an injured comrade straight to their hideout. Listening through the window, he uncovers a horrifying truth. Luke orchestrated Julian's murder and plans to execute Theo in the morning. Luke then draws a handgun on Patrick, making it crystal clear that breaking protocol again will be fatal. Theo hurries back upstairs to wake Key and Miriam, breaking the news that Luke arranged the ambush and will kill him at sunrise. Miriam panics, forcing Theo to quiet her down before Key steps in and insists they must run immediately. He leads both women down the stairs in complete silence to slip out into the yard. Outside, Theo pops the hood of the truck and rips out the wiring so nobody can follow them. Key and Miriam dart across the driveway to climb into the getaway car while he keeps watch for guards. To avoid making noise, Theo manually pushes the vehicle down the driveway slope instead of starting the engine. But the fishes quickly notice the escape, shouting orders to hold fire since Key is inside the car. Patrick lunges through the open window, but the passengers fight him off, giving Theo just enough time to speed away. He chases after them on foot, only to take an undignified tumble over a massive hay bale. Just as freedom seems close, the car stalls out at the gate, because of course the getaway vehicle chooses now to quit. The motor finally catches, and Theo sprints after the rolling vehicle, diving inside just ahead of his pursuers. With the farm behind them, he reassures his shaken passengers that he knows an old friend who can shelter them. Soon after, he pulls over on a quiet road and clears away branches concealing a hidden entrance into the woods. He steps inside the secluded forest home, calling out to find his old friend Jasper and Janice. Jasper suddenly jolts awake in his armchair, giving Theo a proper fright. After rambling about using government suicide drugs on local rats, the eccentric host is introduced to Key and Miriam. Over a warm meal, Jasper explains that a hospital ship called the Tomorrow belongs to the elusive Human Project. He pulls out a map to chart rendezvous points along the coast, settling on Bexhill as the best option. Looking at Key, he reminds her that the child she carries is the miracle the entire world needs. Later, Theo watches Miriam outside in the rain, while Key spends time indoors caring for Janice. While gently braiding hair, Key quietly reveals to Theo that she is already 8 months along. She shares how feeling the baby kick gave her a reason to keep living when despair almost took over. Jasper returns with a plan to smuggle them into Bexhill using a corrupt border guard named Sid who will arrange their arrest. Outside, Theo covers their car with foliage, because high-tech concealment apparently means piling a few sticks on top. Back inside, Jasper shares his custom herbal stash and reflects on how faith and random chance shape human lives. He reminds Theo of how he and Julian first met during a political rally years ago. The room falls quiet as he mentions Dylan, their young son who was lost during a flu pandemic. Their peaceful evening ends abruptly when motion alarms flash on the monitors, showing armed fishes closing in on the property. Jasper gives Theo rendezvous instructions for Rye, refusing to leave and choosing to stay behind with Janice. He presses his hand against the window to say a final goodbye before sending them on their way. With the house quiet, Jasper retrieves a dose of government suicide medicine and approaches Janice. He tenderly administers the lethal dose to Janice so she will not suffer whatever comes next. Meanwhile, Theo hides the vehicle down the road and creeps through the trees to watch the house. Jasper steps outside to greet the heavily armed fishes, casually offering them coffee in an attempt to buy time. But the hospitality falls flat once someone finds Janice dead inside, leading Luke to aggressively demand answers about when the others left. Rather than talk, Jasper defiantly mocks them, so Patrick shoots him right in front of the house. Theo watches from behind the trees in complete horror as Patrick fires one last fatal round. Overwhelmed by grief, he rushes back to his car, roughly shoving Miriam away when she tries to comfort him and telling everyone to get inside. He takes the wheel and lies to Key by claiming their friend is fine, speeding away into the dense woods. Soon after, the group arrives at an abandoned primary school, where Theo heads inside to scout the rendezvous point. While navigating the trashed hallways, a wild deer suddenly bolts across his path, providing a brief jolt to his already shattered nerves. He moves into a ruined classroom and gazes out a broken window, watching Key quietly swing on the abandoned playground outside. Miriam sits among the debris and recalls her former days as a midwife, explaining how miscarriages multiplied when infertility first struck humanity. When she laments the loss of childhood across the globe, Theo gently reminds her that she is going to witness the start of something new. She calls Key back inside, just as an armored military transport rumbles up to the school entrance. Theo steps outside with his hands up and uses the rude password Jasper arranged, greeting the armed guard with an insult. The guard, Sid, makes him repeat the insult before cracking up with laughter, because nothing builds trust like trading hostile pleasantries with border security. With the identity check cleared, Key and Miriam bring their belongings out to board the transport. As they hit the road, Sid continues chuckling about the password and warmly reminisces about his history with Jasper. He notes that most people spend their energy trying to escape Bexhill instead of sneaking in, though he admits he does not care about their motives. But the ride turns chaotic when Key suddenly starts experiencing intense labor pains in the back. Sid delivers quick instructions, directing them to seek out a contact named Marichka near a soldier statue once they are dropped off. Soon after, he unloads the passengers into the bustling checkpoint, leaving Theo, Miriam, and Key surrounded by crowds of arriving refugees. From there, armed guards herd the trio along with dozens of other refugees past wire cages and onto a waiting transport bus. The vehicle rumbles through the heavy security gates, carrying them straight into the heart of the Bexhill refugee camp. Inside, Theo asks about meeting the boat, but Miriam admits that Luke never actually had a direct line to the Human Project. She explains that the organization communicates only through a secretive chain of human intermediaries known as mirrors. Finding out that the master plan relies on a glorified game of telephone is bad enough, but Key suddenly doubles over with severe contractions. To make matters worse, she whispers to Miriam that her water broke, making delivery imminent right there on the crowded bus. Tension spikes when an armed security officer boards the aisle with a patrol dog, searching through the passengers. Miriam begins loudly reciting prayers to draw attention away from the laboring mother, bringing the guard straight to her seat. The officer strikes her over the head and drags her off while the other passengers shout to cause further confusion. Through the barred windows, Theo and Key watch helplessly as their only medical help is locked into a detention pen with the rest of the detainees. The transport soon reaches the main depot, unloading the crowd into a massive indoor facility crawling with military forces. Theo keeps a tight grip on Key as guards shove the arriving detainees down a narrow corridor. A guard snips his plastic wrist ties, but the soldiers abruptly pull Key into a separate processing line. He manages to regroup with her as they spill out past the checkpoint into the chaotic, overcrowded streets of the camp. Searching for their contact, he finds Marichka waiting near a war memorial plastered with missing person flyers. She wheels them through the smoky streets in a cart, while Key grits her teeth through another wave of excruciating labor pains. Their guide leads them away from the noise and up the dark stairwell of a rundown tenement building. They slip into a derelict room, where Key immediately demands that the stranger leave them alone. Theo hands over cash and cigarettes to buy some privacy, because nothing secures high-class hospitality like black market tobacco. With the room secured, he spreads his overcoat across a filthy mattress to give Key a decent place to deliver. As the contractions intensify, he kneels beside her and talks her through every agonizing push. Checking on her progress, he announces that the baby is crowning. In the dim lantern light, he carefully delivers the newborn into the world and tearfully tells Key she has a daughter. He lays the crying infant gently against her chest, marking the first human birth in nearly 2 decades. But their quiet moment is shattered when violent banging rattles the door, and Sid shouts from the hallway outside. Theo pulls away the barricade to let the border guard and Marichka into the room. Sid warns that the fishes have broken through the perimeter fence, and the military will soon flatten the entire district. Then he spots Key huddled under a blanket and demands to see what she is hiding. Pulling back, the cover reveals the newborn, freezing the corrupt guard in total disbelief. Quickly recovering his greed, Sid draws a pistol and orders everyone on their feet. As he herds them down the stairs, he explains that their faces are on the news with a massive bounty attached. Realizing the child makes them worth a fortune, he aims his gun to keep absolute control of his lottery ticket. Theo lunges forward without hesitation, tackling the armed guard to wrestle for the weapon. Marichka grabs a heavy wooden plank and batters Sid until he is down for the count. She then rushes Key and the baby out through the rear exit and into the alley. Theo slams the heavy door right into a recovering Sid, knocking him flat and grabbing his fallen pistol. He finishes the job with a discarded car battery before sprinting away. Dodging through the war-torn streets, he races to catch up with Key and their guide. When language fails, he grabs a piece of debris and sketches a boat on the wall to explain their escape route. Together, they slip into a chaotic surge of armed militants marching through the streets as the uprising begins. Marichka quickly steers them out of the open and into a rundown apartment building to catch their breath. Inside, Key announces she wants to name her baby Bazooka, while Theo still leans toward Frole. Truly essential planning in the middle of an active war zone. Their debate is cut short when an armed contact arrives, confirming that an escape boat will be waiting in 1 hour. Theo wheels Key and the baby through the ruined streets, passing devastated civilians who are mourning their fallen loved ones. Suddenly, British armored vehicles roll into the compound, unleashing heavy gunfire that tears through the courtyard. Before they can escape, armed fishes ambush the group, and Patrick tackles Theo to the ground, furious over the death of Simon. Luke steps in to secure Key and the newborn, offering hollow assurances that they are finally safe with his faction. Ignoring every plea from Theo, he orders his fighters to drag Key and the child away to fuel their uprising. Once the mother and infant are out of sight, Luke coldly instructs his men to execute Theo and the others. Patrick executes a captive on the spot, triggering a chaotic wave of return fire across the ruins. Taking advantage of the sudden crossfire, Theo and Marichka scramble through the chaos to save Key from the squad. He sprints across the open road and dives behind a concrete wall alongside other terrified refugees. Realizing he cannot stay pinned down, he leaves his cover and dashes toward a line of abandoned buses. Ducking inside one of the derelict vehicles, he squeezes past frightened civilians who are desperately bracing against the gunfire. Peering out through the doorway, he watches a military tank blast high-caliber rounds straight down the avenue. He makes another frantic dash across the dirt road, sliding behind rubble right under a crumbling building overhang. A tank shell blasts the structure directly above him, showering the ground in blinding dust and heavy concrete debris. Somehow surviving the blast, he pulls himself up and clambers over the fresh wreckage into the building entrance. He pushes forward through the smoke-filled hallway as soldiers spray continuous gunfire down the corridor. Then, above the deafening explosions, he freezes in disbelief as the faint sound of a crying baby echoes from the upper floor. Following the sound, he sprints through the war-torn upper level to locate the room. He steps into a shattered apartment and discovers Key crouched in the corner, clutching her newborn close amidst the rubble. Relieved to find them alive, he wraps his arms around them both and helps her to her feet. But across the room sits a badly wounded Luke, holding a weapon while marveling at the sight of the child. The rebel leader tries to justify his rebellion, still determined to use the newborn as fuel for his political cause. Theo informs him that the child is a girl, leaving Luke completely speechless as the realization sinks in. With the building crumbling under fresh explosions, the two slip past him and head back toward the stairs. Thick smoke fills the corridor as he shields them from falling debris, pressing forward through the war zone. As the infant wails, surrounding refugees stop in total disbelief, reaching out with awe toward the first child they have seen in decades. An armed rebel raises his rifle to attack, but when he sees the baby, he lowers his weapon and quietly makes the sign of the cross. Moments later, a military squad corners them, but their commander immediately calls for a complete ceasefire. Battle-hardened soldiers stand in stunned silence, parting ways as he escorts the mother and child down the stairwell. They emerge into the courtyard, where an entire army of tanks and infantry halts all combat just to witness the miracle. But the fragile peace breaks in an instant when a stray missile strikes the building, sending everyone scrambling as gunfire erupts again. Amidst the reignited chaos, Marichka reappears and guides them through empty alleyways toward the Water Authority building. She leads them deep into a dark underground drainage tunnel where a small wooden rowboat is hidden. Theo begs her to come along, but she refuses and shoves their boat out into the dark water to ensure their escape. Pushing open a rusted iron grate, he begins rowing out into the dense, fog-covered open sea. While he pulls hard at the oars, he scans the misty water and spots the rendezvous buoy floating in the distance. Military jets scream across the sky above them, unleashing strikes that light up the distant coastline in orange fire. Amidst the explosions, he suddenly notices blood pooling at the bottom of the boat, only for Theo to reveal he was struck by gunfire earlier. He takes her hand with whatever strength he has left, urging her to hold tight to the child no matter what comes next. As the infant starts crying in the cold mist, he gently coaches the young mother on how to pat the child over her shoulder. Grateful for everything he sacrificed to get them this far, she decides to name her baby girl Dylan after his lost son. A faint smile crosses his face, and with his promise finally kept, he closes his eyes and slumps forward in the rowboat. Panic sets in as she frantically calls his name, but he does not answer. Through the thick fog, a massive shape begins to materialize, and she softly promises the crying infant that they will be all right. The human project ship Tomorrow glides out of the dense fog to rescue them, carrying the future of humanity forward across the quiet water. Theo dies knowing his sacrifice succeeded when the ship Tomorrow arrives to rescue Key and baby Dylan. Subscribe for more movie recaps. Write your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next recap.